My father told me measure twice. I didn't know I'd need that advice for my marriage. I used to tell people that Marcus and I met over a dead battery. That was the short version. The long version was that it was February in Maple Ridge, Ohio, 9 degrees with the wind chill. And my Civic wouldn't turn over in the Kroger parking lot on Route 9. He was loading amps into a van 2 spaces down, wearing a flannel jacket that wasn't warm enough for the weather. And he crossed the lot without being asked. He clamped the cables on backward the first try. I remember laughing so hard I had to lean on the hood. He looked up at me like that laugh was the best thing that had happened to him all winter. I was 26 then. A med-surg nurse 2 years out of school, working nights at Maple Ridge General. Marcus was a sound engineer, mixing local bands out of a studio he rented above a hardware store on 5th Street. We got married 14 months later in my parents' backyard, under a tent my father built himself, because my father did not trust rental companies to build anything correctly. I switched to hospice care 6 years in. People ask why. I tell them the truth. I wanted the kind of nursing where you have time to actually sit with someone. Hospice work is slow and exact. You chart everything. Medication times to the minute. Pain levels on a scale that has to mean the same thing today as it did yesterday. You learn to write down what you see, not what you hope you saw. My father used to say something similar, back when he still had his workshop behind the house. Measure twice. Cut once. He was a cabinet maker for 31 years, and he said it about wood, but he meant it about everything. He died the spring before Eli was born. Pancreatic cancer. For months from the day they found it. I sat with him through most of it, which is a strange thing to do professionally and then do again for your own father. In your own childhood bedroom, with the sound of the same water heater ticking in the wall. The week before he passed, he pressed something into my palm. Take the ruler, he said. His hands were bad by then. Yellow at the nail beds. Boxwood. My father gave it to me. You use it right, and it'll never lie to you. It was a folding carpenter's ruler, brass joints gone soft with handling, his initials, WH, burned into the first fold with a soldering iron sometime in the 1970s. I keep it in the drawer by my bed. I have kept it there for 11 years. Eli came the following January. Marcus was in the room the whole time, which is not something every husband manages, and he held our son before I did, because my hands were shaking too hard. For a long time that was the whole story. A good marriage. A quiet town. A son who had his father's ear for music, and my father's habit of asking exactly one more question than anyone expected. I am telling you all of this because you need to know what we were, before I tell you what happened to it. The first small wrong thing didn't feel wrong at all. That's the part people never believe. Marcus started taking longer sessions at the studio. Nothing dramatic. An extra hour here, a late client there. He'd built a decent client list by then. A few local bands, some jingle work for a car dealership out on Route 9, a wedding videographer who needed original scores. I was proud of that studio. I'd helped him paint the walls the color of wet slate, because he said it made the acoustics feel warmer, which isn't a real thing acoustically, but I let him have it. I was working 3 12-hour shifts a week by then. Hospice rotations that started at 7 and didn't really end at 7, because dying doesn't clock out on schedule. Eli was 7 years old and mostly raised by the two of us in shifts, like a small, beloved package handed back and forth at the door. So when Marcus started coming home at 9 instead of 6, I told myself the obvious thing. Business is picking up. That's good. That's what we wanted. The first time I felt something instead of just noticing it, it was small enough that I almost didn't mention it. He came home smelling like a coffee shop that wasn't the one 2 blocks from his studio. I knew the difference because I'd bought coffee from both for years. I remember standing at the kitchen sink one night in April, watching him and Eli in the backyard, Marcus lobbing a wiffle ball high enough for a 7-year-old to actually hit it, both of them laughing at nothing. I remember thinking, almost with relief, that whatever strange stretch we'd been in was over. I let my guard all the way down that spring. I stopped noticing the coffee shop smell. I stopped counting the hours between 6 and 9. I told my sister on the phone that Marcus and I were in a good season, better than we'd been in years, and I meant it when I said it. That's the part that still gets me, if I'm honest. Not the ending. The spring before it. I was so relieved to be wrong about something that I stopped watching for the thing I'd been right about all along. By May, I had almost forgotten there was ever a season to worry about. Marcus took Eli fishing at Lassiter Pond 2 Saturdays in a row. Came home sunburned across the back of his neck, Eli talking so fast about a bluegill he'd caught that he tripped over his own words. Marcus started leaving little notes on the bathroom mirror in dry erase marker. Nothing profound, just good shift, see you at 9, or a badly drawn stick figure of the three of us. I kept one of them longer than I should admit. A smiley face with my name spelled wrong on purpose, because it was the kind of joke that only made sense between us. We went to my mother's for Memorial Day. Marcus grilled. He told the story about the dead battery in the Kroger parking lot to my cousin's new husband. And he told it the way he always told it, like it still surprised him that I'd laughed at him instead of being annoyed. I want to be clear about something, because it matters for what comes later. Marcus was not performing that spring. I don't believe that, and I still don't believe it now. He was, I think, genuinely trying. Whatever had pulled him away in February and March, something in him had decided to come back toward us instead. That's what made it so hard to see what was underneath it. A man mid-affair does not usually also coach little league drills in the cold, and mean it. People are not simple. That's the thing nobody tells you. The people who hurt you the worst are rarely only that. In June, I picked up an extra shift to cover for a co-worker whose mother had gone into the hospital herself. The strange symmetry of nursing sometimes, caring for other people's dying while your own life keeps moving underneath you. I came home near midnight, and Marcus had left the porch light on and a plate covered in foil on the counter, meatloaf, my favorite, still slightly warm. I stood in the kitchen eating cold warm meatloaf at midnight, and I thought, not for the first time that spring, that I had married the right person. That whatever texture our marriage had lost over the years, we were finding it again. I didn't know yet that a woman named Renee Castellano had started coming to Marcus's studio in April, first as a client, a folk singer working on a demo, and that by June she wasn't paying for studio time anymore. I didn't know it because I wasn't looking. I had no reason to look. That was the whole design of the season, whether Marcus meant it that way or not. The warmth was real. The warmth was also cover. The email came in July. I wasn't checking Marcus's business account. I want to say that plainly, because it matters. The email came to our shared household account, the one we use for insurance and the mortgage, because Marcus had accidentally CC'd it while replying to a scheduling request. A single line, buried in a longer thread about a Thursday session. Can we push to after 9? R wants to stay later again. R. Not a full name. Just a letter. The kind of shorthand you use with someone you talk to often enough that a letter is all you need. I read it standing in the kitchen, still in my scrubs, keys still in my hand. I told myself several things very quickly. That or could be Randy, the drummer from the band Marcus had been mixing all spring. That stay later could mean anything in a recording studio, where nothing keeps normal hours. That I was a hospice nurse who spent her working life reading meaning into small physical signs. And maybe I'd trained myself to see illness where there wasn't any. I didn't ask him about it that night. I told myself I was waiting for a better moment. The truth, which took me months to admit even to myself, is that I wasn't ready to hear the answer. I did something else instead. Something I'm not proud of, and also don't regret. I started writing things down. Not obsessively. Not like a woman building a case. More like the part of me that had spent 11 years charting medication times, and pain scales couldn't turn itself off. Dates. Times he came home. A running note on my phone. The kind of thing that looked like nothing if anyone glanced at it. Tuesday 9:40. Smells like coffee shop again. Went home on time, seemed normal. My father's ruler was still in the drawer by my bed. I opened that drawer some nights and just looked at it, the brass joints, his initials burned into the first fold. And I thought about the thing he used to say. Measure twice. I was measuring. I just hadn't cut yet. In August, Eli asked me at breakfast why Dad had a new ringtone. A silly question. The kind kids ask without knowing what they're really asking. Marcus's phone had been buzzing with a different sound for weeks, he said, like a little song instead of the regular ring. I didn't say anything to Marcus. I wrote it down. By September, I had 11 weeks of notes on my phone and a marriage that still looked, from the outside, exactly like it had looked in April. I called a family law attorney named Patricia Yoon, whose office was above a dry cleaner's on 4th Street, 3 blocks from Marcus's studio, a proximity I noticed and didn't like. She had a quiet office and a way of listening that didn't perform sympathy. I laid it all out in order: the dates, the coffee shop smell, the email with the single letter R, the ringtone Eli had mentioned without knowing what he was telling me. She read through my notes twice. Then she set her pen down. "This isn't enough to act on yet," she said. "Suspicion isn't evidence, and in Ohio, fault doesn't move the needle on custody or property division the way people think it does. What you have right now is a pattern. Patterns are useful. But if you want real leverage, for custody, for the house, for anything, you need documentation, not just dates." She told me 3 things that rearranged how I thought about the next several months. First, that anything I gathered had to be legal. No hacking accounts, no recording conversations without consent. Though Ohio wasn't a 2-party consent state, she still wanted me careful. Second, that financial records, bank statements, credit card charges, would matter more in the end than any single conversation I overheard. Third, and this was the one that stayed with me longest, that I needed to decide what I actually wanted before I decided how to get it. "Some women want to save the marriage," she said. "Some want to leave clean. Some want both, right up until the moment they don't. You don't have to know yet. But you should be honest with yourself about which one you're chasing, because it changes what I tell you to do next." I didn't have an answer for her that day. I told her I needed time. She said that was fine. She said most people did. I drove home past the studio on 5th Street on the way back. Marcus's van was parked out front, next to a gray Subaru I didn't recognize. I didn't stop. I didn't call. I just noted the time, the way I'd been noting everything else, and kept driving. That was the last week of September. 2 nights later, I found the bank statement. It came in the regular mail, addressed to both of us, the way it always had. I opened it standing at the kitchen counter while water boiled for pasta. Out of 11 years of habit, not suspicion. There were charges I didn't recognize threaded through the ordinary ones. A hotel in Millbrook, 40 minutes north, twice in August. A florist on 4th Street I'd never bought from. A restaurant called the Amber Room that I'd never heard Marcus mention. 3 charges over 2 months, always on a Thursday. I read it 3 times before I let myself understand it. I did not cry. I did not call Patricia Yoon that night, though I would the next morning. I turned the burner off under the pasta water and sat down at the kitchen table with the statement flat in front of me. And I got a pen, and I circled every charge that didn't belong. The way I'd circle a number on a chart that didn't match the one before it. Eli was upstairs doing homework. Marcus was at the studio, presumably, or somewhere he was calling the studio. I sat at that table for a long time. The kitchen clock ticked past 7, past 8. At some point I noticed the water had gone cold in the pot, and I hadn't moved to drain it. I thought about my father's hands on the ruler, the last week of his life. You use it right, and it'll never lie to you. Numbers didn't lie either, I thought. Dates on a statement didn't care how many wiffle balls Marcus had lobbed to Eli in April. I photographed every page before I put the statement in a folder. Patricia had told me to preserve everything, copies of everything, before I did anything else. I made the copies at the 24-hour print shop off Route 9 at 11 that night, telling Marcus I'd run out for melatonin, which wasn't even a lie. I bought some on the way back. The next morning I called the Amber Room, not to make a scene, just to ask what kind of restaurant it was. A hostess told me, cheerfully, that they did a Thursday date night special, candlelit, reservations recommended. I hung up without saying anything else. I thought about Renee Castellano, the folk singer, a name I'd only half-registered months earlier when Marcus mentioned a client working on a demo. I looked her up. Her website had a photo from a show in June, taken at a bar in Millbrook, 40 minutes north of Maple Ridge, the same town as the hotel. I sat with that for 3 days before I said a word. I asked Marcus to sit down on a Sunday afternoon, after Eli had gone to a friend's house for a birthday party. I chose the timing on purpose. I didn't want our son anywhere near whatever this conversation turned into. I put the folder on the kitchen table between us. I didn't raise my voice. I want to be honest that some part of me expected to, had rehearsed versions of this where I did, and when the moment actually came, I found I didn't have it in me. My voice came out steady, almost quiet enough that he had to lean forward to hear all of it. I need you to look at this, I said. And then I need you to tell me the truth. Just once. That's all I'm asking. He looked at the bank statement. I watched something go out of his face, a kind of color draining that had nothing to do with the light in the room. He didn't deny it. I'll give him that. He sat back in the chair and put both hands flat on the table, and after a long silence he said her name. Renee. He said it had started in April, that it was never supposed to become anything, that he didn't know how to stop it once he'd let it start, that he loved Eli and me and had somehow believed, in the specific way people believe things that aren't true, that he could keep both lives without either one touching the other. He did not raise his voice either, to his credit. There was no shouting in that kitchen. Just his voice, low and unsteady, working through an explanation that got smaller the longer he spoke it out loud, until even he seemed to hear how small it had gotten. The spring, I said. March. April. The fishing trips. Was any of that real? Yes, he said, and I believed him, which was somehow worse than if he'd said no. That was real. I wasn't lying about wanting to be better. I just didn't stop the other thing while I was doing it. I didn't ask him to leave that day. I told him I needed to think, and he nodded like a man who understood he'd lost the right to argue with anything I decided. I went upstairs afterward and opened the drawer by my bed. I took out my father's ruler and held it for a while, the brass joints worn smooth under my thumb, his initials burned into the first fold. I didn't unfold it. I just held it closed, the weight of it in my palm, and I thought about measuring twice. I had measured for months. I had the numbers. What I didn't have yet was the cut. I didn't decide anything in the days right after. That surprised me more than the affair itself, in a way. I expected clarity to arrive like a light switching on. Instead there was just a long, gray stretch where I went to work, came home, made dinner, answered Eli's questions about why his father was sleeping in the guest room, and didn't feel like I knew anything for certain. Marcus moved out at the end of that week, to his brother's place across town, without me asking him to. I think some part of him understood that staying wasn't a thing either of us could survive right then. I called Patricia Yoon back on a Tuesday. I know what I want now, I told her. Tell me, she said. I don't want to punish him, I said, and I meant it, though it took me a while to be sure I meant it. I want Eli to have two parents who don't hate each other. But I'm not staying in a marriage to prove I can forgive something I don't actually forgive. Patricia didn't try to talk me into or out of anything. She laid out what came next, plainly, the way she'd laid out everything else. Divorce filing. Custody arrangement, likely shared, since Marcus had never been anything but a good father even in the middle of being a bad husband. Division of property, which in Ohio meant the house, the studio equipment, the modest savings we'd built over 11 years, would be split according to what was marital and what wasn't. The bank statements help, she said. Not to punish him legally, Ohio's a no-fault state, so infidelity alone doesn't swing property division much. But it matters for the full picture, especially if custody ever gets contested. Courts want to know both parents are stable and honest. Documentation like yours shows the court exactly who kept their composure and who didn't. I spent October gathering the rest of what she asked for. Statements. A printout of the one email with the letter R. A copy of my running notes, 11 weeks of dates and small details that had once felt paranoid and now felt, simply, accurate. I did not tell my mother right away. I did not tell my sister until I had to. I told Eli's teacher, quietly, in case anything showed up in his schoolwork or his mood, so someone besides me would be watching for it. Marcus and I spoke maybe once a week that month, always about logistics, always calm. He didn't fight the timeline. He didn't fight much of anything, which some cynical part of me understood was its own kind of guilt working itself out. I kept my father's ruler in the drawer through all of it. Some nights I still took it out and just held it, not measuring anything, just needing something solid in my hand that had never once lied to me. The filing went in the first week of November. Patricia had warned me it wouldn't move fast, and it didn't. Ohio requires a waiting period, mediation sessions, financial disclosures from both sides, And none of it happens on the timeline your heart wants it to happen on. There was a setback in December I hadn't planned for. Marcus's attorney, a sharp, soft-spoken man named David Reyes, argued that the studio equipment, thousands of dollars in mixing boards and microphones bought over the years, should count as separate property because Marcus had built the business himself, before some of our joint accounts even existed. For 2 weeks I sat with the very real possibility that 11 years of shared bank statements, tax filings, and my own overtime shifts covering the mortgage while Marcus grew that business might not be enough to prove otherwise. I went back through my own records. Not the affair this time. The marriage itself. I found 6 years of joint tax returns listing studio income as household income. I found a canceled check from 2019. My name on it, a payment toward a new soundboard Marcus hadn't been able to afford alone that year. Small things. Documented things. The same instinct that had tracked an affair turned out to be just as useful tracking a marriage. Patricia used all of it in the January mediation session. The mediator, a retired judge named Harold Voss, went through the financial disclosures line by line, unhurried, the way Patricia had told me he would be. He didn't raise his voice. Neither did Marcus's attorney. It was the quietest room I'd ever fought for anything in. By the end of that session, the studio equipment was ruled marital property, subject to the same division as everything else. There was a night in February, one of the hardest of the whole process, when Eli asked me at dinner if Dad and I were ever going to live together again. I told him the truth, gently, the way Patricia had coached me to, without making him carry any more of it than a 7-year-old should carry. He cried for a while. I held him on the couch until he stopped, and I didn't cry until after he was asleep, alone in my kitchen, the porch light off for the first time in a long time. I drove past the studio less that winter. I stopped needing to know whose car was parked out front. That, more than anything, felt like the actual turning point. Not the bank statement, not the confrontation, but the night I realized I no longer needed to check. The final hearing was set for late March. I wore the navy blazer I'd bought specifically for it, plain, nothing that looked like a performance. Marcus wore a gray suit I didn't recognize, which struck me as strange, after 11 years of knowing every piece of clothing he owned. Judge Elena Marsh presided. She was not the retired mediator from January. This was the actual courtroom, small and fluorescent lit, nothing like the mediation office. She reviewed the settlement Patricia and David Reyes had hammered out over 4 months. Shared custody, alternating weeks, the studio equipment split as marital property with Marcus buying out my half over 18 months, the house going to me with a corresponding adjustment to Marcus's share of the savings. Marcus didn't contest any of it in the end. I think, by March, some part of him had stopped trying to hold on to the version of himself that could argue for more. The judge asked as a formality if either party wished to add anything to the record. Marcus said no. I almost said no too. Then I said one thing, quietly, not looking at him, just at the judge. I'd like the record to reflect that Marcus has never missed a single day with our son through any of this. Whatever else happened, that part stayed true. I don't know exactly why I said it. It wasn't for him. I think it was for Eli someday, if he ever read any part of this. I wanted it written down somewhere official that his father showed up, even in the wreckage. The judge nodded, made a note, and signed the decree. Outside on the courthouse steps, Marcus and I stood for a moment in the cold March air. Not quite sure how to end 11 years with a handshake or a nod or anything at all. He said he was sorry one more time, the same as he'd said it in the kitchen back in September, but quieter now, less like an explanation and more like something he just needed to leave on the record himself. I told him I believed him. I did. It didn't change anything. Belief and forgiveness turned out to be 2 entirely different rooms, and I only had the keys to one of them that day. We split up the pickup schedule for Eli right there on the steps, practical, calm. 2 people who had once built a life together now building a much smaller, much more careful bridge between 2 houses. It's been a year and a half now. The house on Larkspur Street is still mine. I repainted the kitchen the summer after the divorce, a pale yellow instead of the slate blue Marcus had liked, because I wanted a room in that house that had never belonged to both of us. Eli is 9 now. He splits his weeks evenly between us, and somewhere in the last year, The handoff stopped feeling like small emergencies and started feeling like just the shape of his life. Marcus makes his practices. He makes his birthdays. He calls to check on him during my weeks, and I've stopped needing to wonder what he's really calling about. I still work hospice 3 shifts a week. I sat with a woman named Louise Fenwick this past winter, 86 years old, a retired schoolteacher, no children of her own. In her last weeks, she told me about a folding ruler her father had given her when she took over managing the family's small orchard, decades ago. She said something to me on one of our last afternoons together that I've carried since. Most people think the measuring is the hard part, she said. It isn't. The hard part is trusting what you measured, even when you don't want it to be true. I told her about my father's ruler. She asked to see it. I brought it in the next day, and she held it in her lap for a long time, running her thumb over the worn brass joints, and she didn't say anything else about it. She didn't need to. I keep that ruler in the drawer by my bed still. 11 years there now, going on 12. I don't take it out as often as I did that fall. I don't need to measure the same things anymore. Last month, I started a small evening class at the county library, free, open to anyone, on how to read your own financial documents, bank statements, tax filings, the kind of paperwork that feels impossible until someone sits down and walks you through it line by line. I named it after my father, the Walter Hensley Financial Literacy Circle. 6 people came the first week. 14 came the second. I don't know what to call what happened between Marcus and me. Not a failure, exactly. Not entirely a betrayal, either, though it was that too for a while. I think, in the end, it was just 2 people who loved each other honestly for a long time, and then one of them stopped measuring twice. If you've ever had to trust numbers over feelings, a bank statement over a marriage, a pattern over a person, tell me about it. I read every comment. I still believe the truth is something you can hold in your hand, if you're patient enough and honest enough to look for it.